Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Vancouver Eastside Vineyard Church on this Mother's Day, May the 10th, the fifth Sunday of Easter, on this beautiful morning here in Vancouver. And regardless of where you're joining us from, a huge welcome. And I'm Gordy, and today I want to talk about change and fear of the unknown. And as we normally do, I'd like to welcome you to just enter into some silence with me for a moment. Maybe just relax where you are and take a couple of deep breaths. Just breathe in and breathe out. And again, just breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. And then just breathe normally. And as I light this candle, enter into some silence. And just be aware of the weight of your body where you're sitting and any feelings or emotions you're feeling this morning. And know that wherever you are, this candle reminds us that Jesus is with us. We are not alone. I'm mindful on this Mother's Day, which is often such a mix of emotions anyway, on this, especially so today, with the social distancing that we have to do, and many of us having to love our loved ones from a distance, and the pain of that. And so much grace and peace and favor on all of you, wherever you are on this day, whatever that pain may entail. May God's grace and comfort and presence be with you today. Change and fear of the unknown. Wow, is that ever a relevant topic? And it comes right out of our text and speaks to our time, because we were already experiencing change on such a massive scale in our world. And then along came the coronavirus. And 3 months ago, who knew what social distancing meant? Who knew what flattening the curve or PPE meant, personal protective equipment? These are all common terms with the change that's come. And with this change comes fear. Fear of the unknown, with questions like what's going to happen, and how long will this last, and will things ever be the same? And I think encompassing that fear is the fear of loss, the fear of what we will lose, and that's probably most consummated in the fear of death. Because death is the ultimate loss of everything we know. Our health, our family, our friends, everything familiar and dear to us as we know it. And yet we're in Easter, and so we're reminded that because Jesus rose from the dead, death does not have the final say. Death is not the end. In fact, it's only another beautiful beginning. And to our resurrection, that with the hope that we will be raised from the dead. But as you think about it, as humans, our lives are a series of deaths and resurrections. Many deaths and many resurrections, from birth to our physical death. And they are kind of typified by seasons, like summer and fall and winter, and then springtime. All entail seasons that we have to let go of to embrace the new. And those many deaths are like that. I'll never forget the time that my daughter, who at the time was 20 years old, came in, and she's still living at home, and she came into my bedroom. I was doing some bedtime reading at night. She came by my bedside, reached over and gave me a big hug and kiss, and she said, "Goodbye, Daddy." And I looked up in surprise and I said, "Where are you going?" And then it hit me. The next day was her wedding day. And I was going to walk her down the aisle, and I was going to give her away to her bridegroom, Marcus. And then I was going to run around, or not run, but walk around to the altar in front and do the wedding ceremony. And it hit me that for the first time, the reality hit me that a season was ending. That this little girl that had been in the next room to us for 20 years, that had been such a joy and delight, was no longer going to be home. And so there was the ending of a season. So the next morning when I woke up, it started out a bit like a funeral. I wept for 2 hours because I realized that I was saying goodbye to this season. But what started out as a funeral ended up being one of the most happy days of my life. On that wedding day, and the joy that followed of a new family and, of course, grandchildren that came out of it. So death and resurrection in that alone. And speaking of grandchildren, my youngest granddaughter, Alina, celebrated her 8th birthday on Friday. Special milestone because for the first time she can swim in the swimming pool outside the arm's length of an adult. That's a huge milestone. So congratulations, Alina. And so Jesus, in his text, is addressing a similar disorientation that his disciples are experiencing because they've enjoyed this 3 years of seeing him heal the sick and raise the dead and feed the 5,000 and confront the Pharisees and preach amazing sermons. And it's just been such a wonderful world. But now he's telling them he's going to go away for a while. And there's this sorrow that you feel. And they're not only is he going to go away, but he tells them that they're going to fail him. They're going to deny him and betray him and run away. And it's just so upsetting to them. And they're realizing, they're grieving the loss of this season. So it's in the middle of that Jesus says to them, he says to them what he's saying to us today, I believe, with all the fear and of the unknown, the uncertainty, the change. He said, don't let your heart be troubled. It's like calm, glassy water being stirred up. That's the Greek word. Don't let your hearts get stirred up. Believe in God. Believe in me. That's his word to us in the midst of change. And his promise follows. He says, in my Father's house, there's plenty of room. There's space for you. There's space for you, to be accepted, to be that unique person, to not have to fit into this rigid whatever of expectation, but you're free to be you. And in that place of acceptance, there's even place for our mess. He said to them, you're going to blow it, but I'll meet you in Galilee. It's okay. We'll just move on. So space. And then he says, I go to prepare place for you. And place speaks of belonging and welcome. And that's what he promises them. This place of welcome when they believe and trust in him. Then he goes on to say, you're never going to be alone. I'm always going to be with you. The Father's going to be with you. The Holy Spirit's going to be with you. I'll never leave you as orphans. You're never alone. And then finally he says, you think this season was good? I got news for you. As hard as it is for you to believe this, there's more where that came from. And there's even better days coming. There's a better time coming for you because you're going to believe in the Father. My works you'll do and greater works. I think to illustrate this, as I was thinking about this week, what came to mind was, as many of you know, one of the greatest joys of our life over the last 15 years has been hosting international homestay students in our home. And the door actually opened for us through Kathleen's vocation as teaching English as a second language. And it actually began with professionals and college-age students and career people who are well established, even people in midlife who had already established careers. We've had top political leaders, well-known international leaders stay in our home just wanting to brush up on our English. And no matter who it's been, I have to say, it's been an incredible joy. But about 3 years ago, things took a turn when I received an email from a 16-year-old high school student from Switzerland. Her name was Leonie. Leonie heard about us through Marcus's family who were attending her father's church. Her father's a pastor in Switzerland. And she requested that we would host her for a 5-month exchange where she went to Templeton School. Well, Kathleen and I fell in love with her before she ever arrived, and it was such a joy to greet her at the airport. And she looked up at me with that big smile. And it was like, I'm ready for an adventure. And boy, was it ever. We just had the most amazing 5 months and enjoyed her in our home. She brought her friends into her home, brought her friends to church. And it was like this beautiful community. And we just so grieved when it was time for her to go. It was like not only did Leonie leave, but she left, her friends left, and her community left. And it was like a season that ended. Well, this has happened over and over again, and we have since hosted students from Brazil, Anna, Santiago from Mexico, Naomi from Germany, and most recently Sophie from Italy. And every time it's been just this most amazing experience. And what I love to do, what we love to do is meet them at the airport if they're not already in town. We meet them at the airport and welcome them into our lives. And we just find it's something so important about somebody waiting for you. And so we welcome them into our home. We give them an orientation. And we say to them, our house is your house. And we really mean that. And there's a few rules, of course, but those rules are based on the premise that just let's be considerate and love one another. That's the rule of our home. So we eat meals together. Once a week, we try to do an outing together, show them our beautiful city and the world. And a special feature is their friends coming into our home and meeting their friends from the school. And many times their friends go on these outings with us as well. Many of them, not all, but some actually join our church family and become part of our church family. And what's been so beautiful is that the relationship has continued after they've gone home, and we've become friends with their families, with their parents. We actually stayed with Leonie's family in Switzerland last summer for a week, and they hosted us so beautifully. And when they leave, it's like I said, there's this large hole that happens, and again we've grieved this, and it always hurts. But what I've noticed is that if we hadn't have opened our hearts, it wouldn't hurt. It was the opening of the heart this that brought the tears. And yet we feel that we always receive as much as, if not more, than what we ever gave. I think the grief over our most recent homestay, Sophie, was particularly acute because of the way it came. It came so unexpectedly and suddenly. And Sophie was already in Vancouver last fall, and we met her through our previous homestay, Naomi. And Naomi was such a joy. She came in the wake of my father's passing, and Naomi was like an angel, just bringing such joy and comfort to our home. And I didn't know how I was going to cope with Naomi's leaving. And then Sophie came. It's just a beautiful comfort. And we met her. She was having a difficult time with a previous homestay, and we heard that she was trying to find a different arrangement. And so we contacted the agency and made arrangements for her to come into our home. And we had this most amazing 2 months with Sophie. And she was just a tease. I think something had been pent up in the previous homestay that she'd been at where she didn't feel like she could be herself. Well, she let it all out, and she was a non-stop tease. One day I went to Starbucks and I ordered a drink, and I ordered it. They asked my name, and I said Gordy. Well, there's something got lost in translation, and instead of saying Gordy, they wrote Lordy on my mug. Well, Sophie saw that, and she never let me hear the end of it. From then on, she would constantly address me as Lordy. And she was a constant tease, and she would scold me constantly for eating too much butter and sugar, or for not listening to Kathleen. She'd give me a hard time. We had so much laughter and singing. We'd often get on the piano and guitar and sing worship songs. She loved to come to church with us. Many of you got to know her in our community, even though it was a short 2 months. But we'd sing Coldplay songs as well at the top of our lungs. And she'd often bring friends over, and and enjoying our new smart TV we had. They'd be watching The Bachelor. Our house would be full of international students and local students, guys and girls from Canada and from around the world enjoying The Bachelor. Yes, you heard that right. That's a whole nother story. And so often after church, Kathleen and Sophie and I would go out for Sunday sushi. So when the COVID-19 restrictions on international travel hit, we were given about 2 days notice, and she was gone. And it ripped our hearts in two. Because in addition to the normal grief of saying goodbye to someone, it was this crushed hopes. I mean, we had 3 more months that we'd been looking forward to, and it's been a whole month, and I'm still tending to that grief. And I'm also mindful that I'm coming up to the 1-year anniversary of my father's death. So there's been a lot of grief that I've been processing in the midst of all this change that's been going on personally and at a macro scale. And the other day I had this experience, because grief comes in waves, doesn't it? You can have this relief, and then all of a sudden it'll just hit like another wave. And this week I was journaling on my couch here in the house, and I was just processing some grief, and another wave of grief just hit me, and I just let the tears come, emptied a Kleenex box, and as I wept, as I was weeping, I don't know how to describe it, but I literally felt the arms of God come around me and hold me. And it wasn't physical, but it was just as tangible. I felt God holding me. And God was weeping with me. Didn't give me any advice, didn't try to exhort me, or didn't try to say, there. God was just holding me. And I was weeping. Now, that was amazing enough. But you know what else happened as that in that moment? Something came out of my spirit, right out of my heart, with these words. I said, Father, would you please hold me like this when I die? And I was actually surprised. I wasn't expecting that. But all of a sudden I realized that this grief that I was feeling, unknown to me, was tapping into a deep-seated fear that I was still struggling with. And that was the fear that I suffered it when I had my nervous breakdown. And that was the fear that I would go to hell when I die. And for 2 years, I had a mental illness and a nervous breakdown, and I believed that I was lost forever. And I've had a lot of healing from that, and I was heavily medicated for 5 years. And I've been healed from that, and I'm not on medication, but I'm vulnerable. I still have a limp. And when there's a seasonal disorder in November and low light months, I struggle with it. And then with the grief that I've been experiencing through social isolation, even though I'm an introvert, I'm a Trinitarian person. I've been in the image of God. I'm born for community. And Kathleen, of course, has been wonderful and held me through this time. But I miss my larger community and can't even hug my grandkids. And I think my system is feeling it. And I think a lot of you are feeling it in ways you don't realize. But I realized I tapped into something. And I realized that if God held me like this when I died, then nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what I was letting go of. It didn't matter what I was saying goodbye to. That God was the source of it all, and there was always more. And you can never outgive God. You can never outgive God. When you let something go to God, you can never outgive God. God is a giver, a generous giver. More and more, over and over, on and on, God gives. And so it was a very powerful moment for me. And as mentioned, a number of our homestays have come to us having had a bad experience with a previous homestay host. And what do you think the primary issue has been? Think about it. What surprised me was how seemingly benign the issue was, how seemingly simple the issue was. Was it because they had bad food? Was it because they had bad accommodations? Or were they being abused in some way, shape, or form? You know, the most common thing that students that had a bad homestay experience told me is they didn't feel at home where they lived. They didn't feel like they were part of the family. They were consigned to a room, a space in the house, treated as tenants, and all they longed for was this sense of home. Through our previous homestay in Naomi, we met one of these students, a friend of hers who was staying having a really bad experience. And she was just one of the sweetest, emotionally intelligent people we've ever met. And she ended up spending a lot of time in our house, and we made her our adopted homestay. And Sienna's situation became so painful for her that in the last month before she returned home, she ended up spending more time at our place and became part of our family. And she actually asked to help me shop. She so longed to be a part of things. And so she did. She wanted to cook and bake and clean. And we took her on outings, and we tried to make up for lost time. And she just became part of us. And I drove her, when it was time to say goodbye, before she returned home, she gave us this album. And you know what this album is? It's her life. From the time she was a little girl up to her time here in Vancouver. And she gave me a bunch of recipes that I can cook with. And she said, you both, she was talking to Kathleen and me because we like to sing together, have a wonderful voice. I love the private concerts, she called, with you. And after dinner, you always offered me a ride, and you were always okay with me coming over, even though I wasn't your homestay student. You made me feel like you are my host family. And I enjoyed every single minute with you. We nailed it. And she writes some more. And I thought, as I drove her to the airport on the day she had to say goodbye, and along with her friends, said goodbye in tears, and I held her, I thought how much her host family had missed out simply because they didn't see her. They didn't open their hearts. And I'm not judging anybody, but I think we have to be aware of our capacity and what we're aware of and our limits when we have people in our homes. And so we're still in regular contact with her, as with all our other homestay students. So Jesus promised us that we can embrace change without fear, because he's promised a place of acceptance for us with lots of room. Never rejected, a place of belonging and welcome for us, where we'll never be left alone or forsaken. And finally, he promised us that as good as all those things are that we have experienced, that we now have to let go of, there's more where that came from, and things will be even better. That he'd been with them, but now he'd be in them, and they do greater works. And I don't know what the post-COVID world's going to look like economically and politically, but from the perspective of the kingdom of God, God's promise is for you and me. If we believe him, we trust him, it's going to be better. So finally, as I wrap this up, I want to send out kudos, first of all, to my own mom, who has been so amazing in my life in giving me a place called home and letting me know that no matter where I go or what I do, I am loved unconditionally. And I want to send special kudos to my wife, Kathleen, for being home to me all these years and loving me through pain and through joy, through these life, deaths, and resurrections that we've walked through, and we're not done yet. Big thank you to Kathleen and to Dee, my beautiful daughter, who has been such a constant source of joy and encouragement. When I went through that terrible nervous breakdown, and up to this day, she continues to be such a bright light. And to all you beautiful women in our church who have such a critical and important part of making VEV a place that so many can call home. Thank you. May the Lord's love, grace, and peace be with you all. Amen.